have a guess at what the sounds are. So let me just share my screen, or I nearly shared the sounds then. That would not have been good. I'm going to share the first for you. If it doesn't play, please give me a shout. I think everyone heard that because I had a bit of background noise in that. So I will play it again. I've got 7 sounds to play, so I'll play each of them twice, and then we can have a bit of a guess and see what people think. This is the first one again. Okay, so that was number 1. I'm going to go for number 2 now.
I
can't skip to an advert. Sorry,
please let this be the time.
Loaded.
When you need to be sure, choose Clear Blue Digital Ultra Early with SmartGuard technology, a unique combination of features and over 99% accurate. Clear Blue, for results you can trust.
Here we go. Got it now. Okay, so that was the second sound. I'll play it again. And then I've got the third sound here. Okay, I'm gonna play that one again. And then I've got the fourth one coming up. Now I'll just play that one again for you. Okay, and then we're on to the fifth one. Play that one the second time, so that's number 5 again. And then we've got number 6. Play that one again for everybody. Okay, so that one was 6. And then the last one we've got is number 7.
Go be the change. You know you'll thank me later. Your life is good.
is the last one. I'll play it one more time. Okay, so I can't see video on here, but I'm just wondering if anyone wants any of them played again, or if you want to go and have a go at guessing that for them.
Anyone got any strong feelings? Should we go ahead for get the answers?
Let's get the answers.
Amazing. Get the answers, lovely. Oh, just before we get the answers, I thought I'd give you a quick plan of the session. So I'm going to talk a bit more about animals specifically and their biology, habits and signs. Got a little quiz before the break. And we'll have the break at approximately 7:10, depending on how much I talk. And then we'll talk about supporting these animals in their gardens, in your gardens after the break. So the first...
We've got presenter view, if you know what I mean.
Oh,
so
have you? Oh, no.
Yeah.
So you're going to see it. That's... okay.
This happened to me a few weeks ago as well, so it's really annoying. Have you got two screens?
I do have two screens. I need to do the other screen.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All these like toolbars come up, don't they? So you can't actually see the button you want to press. It's very frustrating.
Right, is that
That's it. That's
perfect?
it.
Amazing, thank you very much. So the first one then, everyone's seen. So does anyone know what it was from the picture? Anyone got any ideas?
Tawny owl.
Yeah, exactly. Tawny owl. So saying the twit-twoo of a nighttime tawny owl. Fantastic. Anyone know what the second one was?
It sounded like a cat.
So think the same kind of size as a cat, but
What, badger?
Badger.
yeah, exactly
I put
that.
badger.
Yeah, so it's a badger. It was actually a badger telling another badger off. So there was a bit of a like stuff over some food on that one. So yeah, well done whoever said badger. Next one, any ideas?
I put hedgehog, but I am guessing.
Yeah, we turned around and said hedgehog.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah,
Oh,
hedgehog
yeah.
hissing at another hedgehog and then saying that's my food. Always quite a lot of food competition going on at night if animals are out and about looking for their food. The next one then?
Fix a mating pool. Fox.
Yeah, fantastic. Got a nice fox. Absolutely love this picture as well of Bristol. Yeah, mating pool, screeching sound. Everyone thinks someone's getting hurt. A fox in the right season for them to mate. Next one.
I thought it was a robin.
Oh,
I thought bat, maybe.
yeah. So I completely see why people said robin. It does not sound like a bat you'd normally hear. You normally hear the this kind of noise when you're looking at an echolocation.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But this was it's like a frequency division. It's a different way of recording a bat, and it's what the other bats tend to hear. So it was actually a Nathesius pipistrelle singing, and they do that to kind of attract females in. So it's a male singing to the females to get them to come in, but that's not the sound we would hear on a normal bat detector. A frequency division one. It's more of a recording to see how they sound. But I thought I'd put it in because it's just so lovely, the fact that bats can sing to each other. I thought it was very, very nice.
No.
Next one.
Six. I don't remember what 6.
Number 6 is the next one.
I put fox, but I'm not sure.
It's not. This one was a slightly tricky one. I can see why you said fox because they have the bark as well. It's actually muntjac deer, so it's a deer, but we tend to get them quite a lot around here, so it's quite a good one to hear. Yeah, they're native, but we have a lot of them now in the UK, and you tend to find the horns quite a lot. And they're just quite an interesting one to hear. You're out in the late spring and listening for like other mammals, you're more likely to hear these ones. And then my last one, any ideas?
That was really quiet, wasn't it? I can't.
I put, but this is a bit wild, I put baby birds or little hoglets at feeding time.
Yeah, I completely see why. Again, it sounds a little bit like a bird. It's a bit of a weird one, but I thought if you're out at dusk in your garden, it's a sound you might actually hear, and it's a shrew. So they kind of make this like little kind of chirping, squeaking noise that you tend to hear. And no one ever knows what it is. So I thought it was quite a good one if you're out in your garden at dusk to try and see what you've got around and you hear that sound, you'll know you've got some shrews around, which is quite nice. So thank you for playing that. I just thought it'd be a nice introduction, get us thinking, get us warmed up on a Wednesday evening. So like I said, we're going to be talking about animals in our garden. So I thought I'd show you a picture of my garden, looking a little bit of a mess if I'm honest, but I thought we could think about going into breakout rooms for a couple of minutes just to chat to each other and see what animals you think might be in this garden. And I'm hoping Steph can put us into breakout rooms literally for just like a minute, Steph, 2 minutes.
Okay, come on it. Okay. One thing that's quite weird, Dani, we're getting like a grey box over your screen.
I think it's because the breakout rooms popped up. I hadn't noticed that because I'm looking at the other screen. Okay, so if I close that, is that gone?
And there's something over the top of the slideshow.
Ah, okay.
For me, like it could be anything. I'd sort of try to be a bit look for clues. So I couldn't see a pond, a bird feeder, a bat box, I couldn't see anything that would make it obvious what you're trying to attract. But the flowers, I thought bees, butterflies. We said hedgehogs in our breakout rooms, foxes, bats. Someone said bats. That was kind of where we started.
Nice.
We thought that the hedgehogs under maybe where the pagoda is and everything ran that way.
Yeah.
And at the back foliage and possibly some badgers.
Nice. Any others before I talk? No, I mean, great ideas. Yeah, all completely true. I purposely did an angle where I didn't have my like bat box and bird box in there. So I'm really pleased that you picked up on that because I wanted to talk about actually if you've got enough habitat, the animals don't necessarily need those, especially for bats, which I'll talk a bit more about later on. They really like roosting in trees. So if you've got some really nice trees, obviously not everyone's garden is suitable for that. So then putting bat boxes around. But I'm in quite a built up area. So I had to put my bird box and bat box kind of think about where I'm going to put them because obviously you don't want cats getting up into there. But yeah, I think I'll show you a little video. I put a camera trap out quite recently and I can show you what I saw, but we've had hedgehogs in the past. And yeah, there's bat boxes, bird boxes. I can't remember what everybody else said, but I think they are the main ones and I will show you my video. But I just wanted to show you that, yeah, you get quite a variety even in quite a built up area. So I'm going to move on to the next one and I will show you my, gone on to that. Computer has just decided to freeze on me. There we go. Okay, so hopefully this will play for you all. Okay, so I'm going to play it again and just talk through a few things. But as you can see, it had lots and lots of foxes in the garden, some of which I think are the same and some of which I think are a bit different. We've actually got a little den around the corner behind. There is a pond. This bit at the back here is a pond. So they've denned just around the back there, which is lovely. Actually, you could see then, let me pause it a second. I didn't do all of the these bits, but I have a lot of insects in the garden. So quite often the camera trap was getting set off by all of the insects, which is really nice as well. So obviously means it's giving a lot of food for them. And unfortunately, have lots of cats out at night, which might not help our smaller. I haven't seen any small mammals in my garden, but that might be the answer because we've got a lot of cats in our neighbourhood. And someone also said badger. Luckily enough, I've got some badgers, which is really, really nice to see in a kind of urban area. Foxes are obviously really used to urban areas, but badgers are a bit more sporadic. But we've got a little set of badgers that come in the garden quite regularly as well, which is nice. And this camera trap was just from Aldi at the time, quite reasonably priced. And it was really lovely to just pop it in the garden and see what animals I've got. So my first thing to recommend to you, if you're interested in your mammals and animals in your garden, is to go out at dusk and just sit there with maybe a cup of tea, have a listen to the noises around, see what you hear, especially if you start to tune into those sounds. It's really nice to start to hear all the different animals that are around. And if you can get or borrow or buy a camera trap, it's really nice to see the different wildlife in your garden and the insects and everything like that.
I just want to second that because I live in Bath, in the centre of Bath, and some animal kept digging up my plants in my front garden. And I was like, who the hell is doing this? This is so weird. I got a camera trap as well, and I put the camera trap out and it was a badger. And I've been obsessed with badgers my whole life, and I just could not believe that I had a badger. And it was so exciting, and just having the evidence of that. It was like at 3 a.m, so I'd never have seen it otherwise. So yeah, it's good to know that Aldi sell like affordable ones.
Yeah, it was last summer as well. So around this time last summer from memory. So it's definitely having a look. But yeah, it's just so exciting and it's so nice. It makes you feel like, especially if you're putting loads of effort into your garden for nature and wildlife, to then be like, oh, it's paying off and they are coming and they are using that site, which is lovely. Thanks, Steph. So I've just got these 4 pictures on there, which we've talked about. But I just thought I'm going to zoom in because I can't talk about everything tonight, even though I'd love to. These are the kind of creatures I'm going to be zooming into. So I'm going to talk about each of them before the break, and then we'll kind of talk about the threats and ways to look after them after the break. So as you can tell, they're all mammals. So they are obviously shy, nocturnal, and coming out when we're not around, like Steph just said, at 3 a.m. And as much as you might want to go out and say that, I don't think anyone's going to be doing that very often. So it's really nice to be able to have different ways to know that they're around and know that information about them. So I'm going to start with hedgehogs. They are obviously nocturnal, and they are really good with gardens. So they are used to going into gardens. It's the perfect habitat for them. And there's been some studies done that they found that there's more in perfect garden habitat, there's more hedgehogs than in like more kind of rural areas, because it's such a good variety. So I've just got a garden here of like, you can see the mix of plants and wildlife and shrubs. So actually it's perfect for hedgehogs. And they can roam really far in a night. So they can roam like 2 kilometers per night, which means that they need to go between gardens to get all of the food that they need, and obviously to meet other hedgehogs and mate and things like that. And they eat slugs, snails, beetles, earthworms, so lots of stuff, especially as gardeners, slugs, things we don't really necessarily want. So they're really good to have in our gardens to help with that natural getting rid of insects. And I've got a picture of one hibernating. So they tend to hibernate in hedgerows or under shrubs with lots of fallen leaves, and they'll make themselves a nest overnight, over winter, and they'll kind of go into that, hibernate over the winter. And that tends to be around October to April, depending on the weather. But if you ever see a hedgehog in your garden in the daytime, it probably means that it's not very well. So it's always worth giving someone to RSPCA or Secret World is around Bristol area a call. I'm sure there's loads of other places as well if you do see one out, especially if it's coming towards October time. they need a certain amount of weight to be able to hibernate effectively. So if they're at, I know no one's going to have their scales to do this, but if they're under 600 grams, then they probably won't survive the winter, or they end up waking up over winter and then not having any food. So if they're out in the day, it's either because they're poorly, they're desperate for food, or they're trying to like bulk up before winter. So it's worth giving a cool, or even putting some food out for them. So they can eat like cat food or dog food, but it has to be the wet stuff. It can't be like the dry biscuit, and you shouldn't be putting out milk for them because it's really bad for their stomachs. So they're kind of a bit of overview of hedgehogs. And I just want
Dani, with the hedgehogs, if you're doing a house for them, a hedgehog home or whatever for them to go in, is the entrance supposed to be in a certain direction, or literally is that a bit of a old wives' tale?
I do remember reading something about that, but I used to work at an animal rescue centre, and we never put them in any specific direction, and they always were used. And when we released them into different areas, we put like hedgehog houses out so they had places to go back, and it never made much of a difference. But I think we're going to talk about that a bit later, but actually talk about is the kind of direction isn't maybe as important. But if it's in like direct sunlight, it might overheat, or if it's like facing the hedge, then they might not find it. So it's thinking about getting the mindset of an animal, or like that, so think about the route that they're likely to take around your garden. So they tend to use like linear features to walk around it, unless they're actually searching for insects. So they'll kind of go around the edges of paths. So if you've got it facing towards the path, if that makes sense, then they're more likely to find that entrance to then use it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Perfect. But yeah, I have read that in the past, but I don't think it makes any difference. Thank you for your question. So this is a bit of a depressing stat, and obviously we're talking about them, and then we're going to think about some positives of how we can look after them. But I just wanted to flag that we've lost so many of our hedgehogs in the UK, over 96% in the last 13 years, which is a huge amount. And you can see, especially the southwest, where we are all, I'm assuming, based, has been a lot of a really big decline in comparison to some other areas, with the red being like 80 to 100% density, and the very light green white being like 0 to 20. So we're losing our hedgehogs, and we obviously want to make sure that we have them. And it's interesting working with young people specifically, and adults with these courses. I ask so many people how many people have seen a hedgehog, and it just seems to get less and less every year. So thinking about what, like I say, we're going to think about how we're going to help them in a minute, but just a bit of background on the hedgehog. And we've got foxes. So like I say, I've got foxes in my garden, which is lovely. And they've made a den just behind the pond. It wasn't a great photo, so I've used a separate photo. But one of the really easy ways to tell if you've got a fox in your garden is that foxy smell. So I don't know if anyone's noticed that before. They've got a very potent smell that you're like, that is foxy. So once you've smelt it, there's no way you can realize it's anything else than a fox. If you haven't smelt it, what I would recommend is, if you ever find like a den like this, going and just walking around that area, and you'll get that like musty smell. It's very hard to describe, but it's very clear once you know it. And fox dens are round, so you can see this den is literally like a 0. That is one of the really telltale signs that it's a fox den, that it's nothing else in there as well. And foxes are just perfectly adapted to our urban, suburban landscapes. They're opportunists, so they'll eat mostly anything. Definitely if your neighbours put stuff out, they'll eat that. They eat rabbits, rodents, berries, worms, carrion, get into the bins. So very good in these kind of settings if they're given the space. And like the recording, they can scream and they have conversations. That scream is heard quite a lot during autumn, because the juveniles disperse. So they're getting kicked out of their family home by mum and dad, and they're going off to find their own spaces. So there's a few arguments going on. And then kind of December to early February, when there's mating, you'll hear that again, because the males are competing for females in that space. So it's quite a nice way to hear them, but it can be a bit startling if you're not expecting it. And again, foxes have declined by 41% since 1995. So even though we're saying that actually they are doing really well in urban populations, we've still actually lost quite a lot of foxes, which I thought was quite interesting because it's one of the animals that you kind of tend to think is doing okay. So they still do need some extra helping hand as well. And also just an interesting fact, which I thought was interesting, was that the oldest fox recorded in the wild was 9 years old, whereas normally they last about 2 to 3 years. So quite an interesting fact. So 9 years old can be quite old. In captivity, they can last like 25, 30 years. So they're quite long lasting if they've got the right habitats. And other thing for foxes is the habitat range can be absolutely huge. So they can have tiny little, like less than a kilometre squared habitat, or they can have to venture like 40 kilometres. And it tends to be a lot smaller in an urban setting compared to a rural setting, because there's a lot more food availability and like bins and stuff like that around in urban areas, as opposed to rural areas where they're out having to search and hunt for a lot more food. It's also quite interesting. Any questions on foxes before I go on to the next slide?
Can I ask a question, Dani?
Of course.
You know, foxes, their diet, I know because they poop in my garden, and the things that come out are so like the man-made things. How are they, is that really bad for them, or have they just now evolved to just be able to handle that?
I think there's a mix. I think it's not great for them, and I think part of that is why they probably don't have massive lifespans, because if you think they're putting stuff in their bodies that they shouldn't be, and they can get quite ill from it. But I also think there's a bit of an adaptation to that. Like it's a little bit like different types of dog species are much more adapted to eating. So chocolate's a really good example for dogs. Some species of dog, I've got a Labrador, she's eaten chocolate so many times and she's absolutely fine. Other dog species dog breeds, would be really, really poorly. And I think foxes in this country and in urban settings have adapted to being able to eat absolute rubbish and being much better for it. Whereas I think in other countries, especially, and also rural settings, they might not have those adaptations.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Is that all right? It's
Yeah, of
probably
course.
silly, but it's something I've always wondered about foxes because I love them and I feel like they get a really hard time and really bad press. So I sort of like end up championing them. But
Good.
what I've wondered, and it's quite hard to defend them over, so I wondered if you had the answer, is they do seem to like to play and hurt a lot of things that they're not intending to eat. So for example, we have hedgehogs come in that have been hurt by hedgehogs, by foxes unnecessarily. You know, people talk about their chickens. So is that a play thing? Like, why do you think they do things when they don't need to, like they're not going to eat it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. There's actually some really interesting studies about this. No one's got the 100% the answer, but the reason, like back in the day, I suppose, and what the animals are doing is they're practicing. So quite a lot of, you see young, and it probably is juvenile or young foxes, or foxes that have just started hunting or just been on their own, or just before that point where they're kind of practicing. And in other countries, I don't think it's been shown in the UK, but definitely in other species of foxes in different countries, the parents will bring live food back to them so that the pups can practice how to kill it and how to catch it. So I think there's something about that, but it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because it's really hard to champion that when people see that situation. But it's kind of them practicing and learning how to catch their food while they can, so that when they're older and they are completely on their own, that they've had those practices. That's the main kind of reason in studies, but again, it hasn't been 100% confirmed.
Thank you.
That's right. Any others?
We've had a question in the chat, Dani. Do foxes drink cow's milk? Something knocked over our milk bottles on the front doorstep and the milk was consumed by something. Never had this happen before.
do you know what? This is so interesting. Someone was talking to me about this the other day. So yeah, they do. So they'll definitely, they're like I say, opportunistic. So if they find it, they will knock it over, drink it. And this person was saying that, so it might be useful information for you, is that they had to then move where their milk was kept because the fox kept coming back, and they put a camera trap out so saw it and saw it was a fox. But they had to move it because it knew that it could come back and get that drink. So it might be worth putting a stone on top or moving it. But interestingly, while they were doing that, they actually saw, I think it was blue tits, because the fox was knocking it over and drinking most of it. Then the blue tits were coming down and having a drink as well, which I didn't really think birds would want to drink milk. But there you go.
When we were kids, the blue tits always used to, like, when the milk bottles were there and the tinfoil top, and used to peck at the tinfoil tops to get to the cream. So we used to have that regularly on the milk bottles when we were kids. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I learned something new today. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
that makes sense.
That's like, sounds like something from a Disney film, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? That's so nice. Oh, I like that. I'm gonna have to get some bottle tops and put them out and see if get some videos of the blue tits doing it. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next thing because I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure I get the chance to talk to everything, but please do interrupt and ask me questions. I'm more than happy. So I'm also going to talk to you about badgers, which I have got a soft spot for. I think they get a bit of a bad reputation, but again, they're quite opportunistic. They will eat a lot of anything that's around them, and they're quite bugs, slugs, berries, everything that they can get their hands on, they will eat. And unfortunately, because we've talked about hedgehogs, and this is always a question that gets asked, badgers sometimes do predate on hedgehogs. It's not their like completely, they will go for hedgehogs out compared to everything. If a hedgehog stumbles into their path, they have been known to eat hedgehogs. So I think there's sometimes a bit of conflict with people worrying about badgers and hedgehogs. But my main argument to that is if we had all of the hedgehogs and all of the badgers at the right population levels before mass declines, they'd have found their equilibrium and they would be fine. The issue is because we've got so few of the hedgehogs around that when the badgers do stumble across them, it feels like a lot more of an issue than it maybe would have been. But that is a question that always comes up. But they are lovely. I think they're just sweet animals to go and watch. And maybe people have seen these, and less likely in your garden, more likely in woodlands. But like I say, I've got some badgers that come into my garden. It's actually my neighbour's house that has the set. And you can see with this one, as opposed to the fox, which was nice and round, this has got a very flat bottom. So it's like an upside down D. So it's a bit like the badger itself, if you think it's quite squat and rounded, and the fox is quite slim. So the fox has a 0 and the badger has an upside down D. And normally is a lot cleaner. Actually, the set entrance is kind of been scraped away. They keep it clean regularly. So you'll see if it's active as well, because you'll start to see the soil move and you'll see that they've cleaned it out and maybe got rid of some of their hair at the top, which is a really nice thing to do. Whereas the foxes tend to be slightly more messy. They don't clean it out quite as regularly as the badger, and has a slightly different smell. So it's more of a mustelid smell. It's quite a musty smell, whereas the fox is quite a strong, potent, different smell. It's really hard. I love doing these courses in person because you can at least like show people and get them to smell different areas. But anyway, so that is the badger. And then I also wanted to spotlight on our UK bat species. This is my go-to. I've got a bat license. I'm very interested in bats. I do bat boxes and spend a lot of time working with these creatures. There are 18 different species of bat in the UK, and we have a lot of them in kind of Bristol, Avon, Somerset area. I've just starred all of the ones that we find in this area. So we're really lucky that we find so many different bats in the southwest of the country, which means that you're likely to have some of them either in your garden roosting or using it for insects or flying across it. So there's a really nice variety of bats that we're likely to see or here, and we can help support with our gardens. I'm going to spotlight on a few, but I thought I'll just show you this. Actually, the keen amongst you might have noticed that I've only got 17 on this slide. It's because one species of bat there's only one male left, and he's only found in one place in Sussex. So a really sad story, but we've got a lot of other species, and with climate change, we've actually get some more species come in. There's about 3 species that are on the continent that have come across that aren't being classed as UK bat species at the moment. But I'd say in the next 5-10 years, we'll definitely have a different variety of bats in the UK as well, which is quite interesting. Try to find my clicker to go on to the next slide. So just a quick spotlight on bats, I suppose, is that I think some people think that they're a bit scary and a bit misunderstood. So yeah, wanted to do a bit of a little talk on them. So they hibernate kind of November, December, January, February, March, start coming out into torpor, so awake some of the time, asleep some of the time, depending on the weather. And then they'll be flying around May, June. And then by June, July, they'll be starting to have their babies. And so this time of year, actually in July, August, once we come into that year, that's when you're likely to see them more in your gardens, because you're more likely to see juveniles that have either started learning to fly and haven't done a great job of it, or are a bit tired because they're trying to catch food for themselves for the first times, or they're trying to find places and they've not done a very good job to find places overnight. So if you're in your gardens at that time of year and you do find a bat, the best thing to do is not to touch it with your bare hands, but just to pop it out of the way in case there's like cats or anything around. And there's a number that I can give you at the end that you can call, but that's a good time to start seeing them at night as well. So if you are interested, like I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to go out and kind of take stock of what's in your garden at night, if you go out at like dawn and dusk is better, obviously. I would say around like July, August is a lovely time to go out, because the babies start to practice their flight. So they'll go out of the roost, fly around a little bit and then go back in. So you're more likely to see where your bats are as well, which is really lovely. And then September is where this kind of breeding, mating time is going on. So it's called swarming. So might be quite a big group of bats flying around at night, which is again a lovely thing to see, but don't tend to be in your gardens, tends to be in kind of bigger spaces. But it's an interesting fact. So they mate actually in September, October, November, but then they hold the sperm inside them separate and don't fertilize the eggs until they come out of hibernation and have found the right place for them to have their babies. Then they let the sperm fertilize the egg, and then they have their babies. So it's just quite an interesting way of doing it. So what you might see if you're in your garden and you do have bats is you might see a tree like this with a hole. So we've got a woodpecker hole and a bit of dirt coming out of it, which means that there's probably a bit of bat poo on there. And if you just wait at dusk, 20 minutes before dusk to like an hour after dusk, depending on the species, you'll tend to see them coming out of that roost. So if you're not sure, it's really nice to just sit, cup of tea in your garden and see if any bats pop out, which is lovely. And then you'll also see them hopefully flying around collecting insects as well. You can also put bat boxes up, which I've got a little picture of a little long-eared bat here in a bat box. And then I've just got a couple of cute bats, because why not? And then, I've got a sound. I'm just playing. I don't know if anyone could hear that if it played, but I mentioned earlier that we had the sound of the pipistrelle bat, what the other bats hear, so them lecking and singing to the females. This is what on most bat detectors you would hear. Which is quite a different sound, but it's catching those echolocations as a distinct noise, which is quite interesting as well. And obviously that's the bat, how the bat is catching its food. And I've just got a picture, because the other place you're likely to see bats in your garden is actually in your house, under the roof tiles or in little cracks, not inside your house, but around the house. So again, same principle, just come, have a little look, and then you might spot something like this, which is really nice to see. Lovely video, and you can hear the bat detector going on in the background, but they're just having a little check of the area when they come out, and then they're popping out. So it's really nice to start seeing them. And if you are really, really keen, if you go back in at dawn, about half an hour before it gets light, you'll see them actually swarming around the roofs. So they do a lot, rather than at night where they come straight out and leave. In the morning, they almost like talking to each other. They fly around a little bit, have a little chat, and then they go back into their roost. So it's a really lovely thing to see as well. So I also just thought I'd pop this on there because I always get this question of why do bats matter? Because people don't think they're like flying rodents, and hopefully I'm preaching to the choir here, because rodents are still lovely, but bats internationally are really important as well as nationally. So they pollinate so much of our food in obviously other countries. In the UK, our bats are all insect eaters, so they don't pollinate in this country, but in other countries they do. And actually they pollinate chocolate and mangoes, and some banana plants are pollinated by bats. Tequila is all pollinated by a bat. So actually, if we didn't have bats, we wouldn't have quite a lot of the things that we would quite like to eat and drink. So I thought that was quite useful. They also do a lot of seed dispersal in, again, other countries where they're eating the fruit and then they're dispersing and creating forests. But specifically in the UK, they're an indicator species of really good quality. So the more bats you have in an area, the more good quality that habitat is, especially some of the slightly rarer bats that we find that we already know in the southwest. But if you're getting them in your gardens or your like nature reserves nearby, it just shows that the quality is really there. And they are used as indicator species in a lot of studies, and also in like collecting data on how good those environments are. They're also really good pest control. One tiny pipistrelle bat, which is about the size of your thumb, its body, and then its wings are about the size of your fingers. So tiny little body. They look bigger when they're flying because they've got such big wings. They eat about 3,000 midges a night. So that is an incredible amount of insects that they are eating, and like taking away from crops, from your plants, everything like that, over the course of one night. And if you think if you get them in, pipistrelles tend to be in groups of about a couple up to like 300. So that's a lot of pest control that you're getting if you've got bats in your garden or in your areas.
What's the lifespan of a bat? Or is it
Pardon?
dependent on what's the lifespan of a bat, or is it dependent on the breed?
It depends on the species of bat, but really interestingly, the oldest bat recorded in the wild was about the same size as the pipistrelle I mentioned. It's about thumb size, and they put a ring on one of the wings, and it was an adult bat when they ringed it. They ringed it for 43 consecutive years after that. So it was definitely 43, if not older, and that was in the wild. So very different to mice, which have only got like a year, 18-month life cycle. Bats are very big, and there's a lot that have been recorded in the wild from 20, 30 years, but the oldest, like I say, is 43 at the moment. So
hard. I would have thought a couple of years.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's still so much we don't know about bats because of how they do, and the fact that they go into torpor and they can slow their heart rate down to 2 beats a minute, and 1 breath a minute when they are in torpor and hibernation. So we think that that's why they then are such long-lived creatures, but it actually means that that's why they're declining so badly, because quite often they won't have a baby every year. And if they're long-lived creatures, they tend to not have babies as regularly. So the numbers decline, and if they're quite sensitive, which we know they are because they're indicator species, then they don't populate themselves as much as like mice and rats that are obviously quite fast-lived, have lots of babies, kind of live young, live young, die fast, or whatever the saying is. Bats are the opposite, very long-lived, don't have pups, I shouldn't call them babies, don't have pups as often, so are declining quite massively. And out of the 18 species in the UK, there's only 3 that are kind of remaining stable. All the rest are declining or are not doing as well, which is obviously a real shame. Any other questions on bats?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Ed, and then we've got some in the chat as well.
All right. This isn't meant to be at all negative about bats, but do they have any impact at all upon pollinator species, or is it most pollinators daytime animals and therefore not so prone to being predated?
It's a great question. So yeah, most are daytime, but then if you think of moths pollinate certain plants, so obviously they are going to have an impact. But I think it's looking at the kind of bigger picture of that everything's declined, so we need to bring everything back, not have that decline. But I totally appreciate that.
I mean, how much of the decline is thought to be down to reduced populations of insects?
There's a massive mixture. So one of the main things is reduced insects, which is obviously because of the habitats that are available. So the insects are down, so the bats are down, which is a massive thing. Also pesticide use as well. So the fact that they're bioaccumulating in the bat itself is causing lots of issues. And there's quite a few other reasons. But I'm going to ask that question later on, so I'm going to not say too much, but I will pick it up if I... Are there any more in the chat, Steph?
Yeah. So what bat species that we have in the UK might be detrimentally affected by climate change? Is one question.
I'm going to go back to the pictures of them. I think all of our bats actually at the moment are going to have to adapt to climate change. Some are going to be more affected than others, but there's a lot of studies at the moment about this because it's been such mild winters, they're not hibernating properly, and then they're coming out and waking up a lot, which means that they're not it takes a lot of energy to go into hibernation and a lot of energy to come out. So if it's really mild, they come out thinking it's spring, there's no food around, so then they go back in, so they're losing lots of energy and obviously not replenishing it because it's not spring, so they haven't got the insects around. So all of the bat species they think are going to have massive issues because they're going to have to readapt to not necessarily hibernating, or the food that they're going to be eating and the time that food comes out. So for example, if I look at the long-eared bats, which are really interesting anyway, because brown long-ears are quite, I say common, they're not common anymore because all of our bats have declined, but the grey long-ears, we've got about 200 left in the UK, whereas the browns are like a steady population. It is declining, but much in the thousands, rather than 200 bats left. But both look at have moths as their main food, and they have certain times of the year that those moths come into peak. So yellow underwing is a good example. They have a big peak. I've gone blank on the time. I think it's June, July, but I will double check that, which is when they're feeding their babies and they're getting loads of energy. So it aligns really well at the moment. Obviously, with climate change happening, the bats are still going to have their pups at the same time, but the moths might come out at different times. So there's been quite a lot of different stuff going on about when the food is going to be coming out, when they're going to hibernate, are they going to move? Because it might be that, again, certain bats like really hot maternity roosts, so they normally gather together to have maternity roosts. So a good example of that is the Seritin bat, this one at the top. They come together in the hottest places you can think of, and are really happy there in groups of 200, whereas other bats are much more sensitive to the heat. So they need to be, so horseshoes are a really good example of that. They need a really stable, really cool environment to have their pups in. if it's getting hotter, it's probably going to affect them. They're going to probably struggle to find places to have those pups, whereas Ceratins might be okay, but then it might even get too hot for them. So it's even just thinking about that. At least Ceratins will then probably be able to find other places, whereas the horseshoes, I think, are going to be very sensitive to that. So there's a lot going on and a lot of studies, but it will be interesting to see if they move up. The ideas and thinking at the moment is that quite a lot of the bats will move up the country, so they might end up more in Scotland or the north rather than the south at the moment, because the south is the perfect temperatures for most of our species. So they might move up, but it might mean that we start bats from the continent moving to us, which is again the right habitat for them now. So it will shift everything. And there's loads of really interesting studies on this about like modeling what might happen. We know something's going to happen, but until we see it, I think it's going to be really hard to know for sure. Does that answer that question?
I think so. Dani, next question. How far do bats travel at night?
Oh, that's another great question. I shouldn't have skipped. I should have stayed on this one. Again, it really varies, but some will travel, the bigger the bat, the bigger the distance that they will travel. So again, I use horseshoe as an example. Greater horseshoes are like pear size, and they will travel like 20 kilometers a night, if not further, to look for food. But they fly really far, really high, and go like to where they're going to, whereas other bats might only do couple of kilometers a night, but they're all closer. If you've got a really rich garden, they might fly straight out their roost into that garden and be completely content for the whole night. So it does really vary, and again on the species as well. But the bigger the bat, the more likely they are to travel 10, 20, 15 kilometers a night.
You might come on to this next anyway, but where's the best place to put a bat box in a garden?
I am going to come on to that later on, so I will answer that in a minute.
Okay, I think Amy's question about how we can help bats is going to be answered too, but how many babies or pups do they have per litter?
They'll have one, and it's very rare for them to have two, and if they have two, it's likely that one doesn't survive. They do need it normally takes quite a lot to look after two. Occasionally in captivity, they will have two and both will survive, but it normally means that the person looking after that bat actually takes one of them and starts feeding it as well. And the mums don't tend to produce enough milk for both pups, because it just doesn't happen in the wild really. So I think I've seen it a handful of times, and I've been working with bats for probably like 15 years now, and that's with like talking to lots of different people, so very, very rare.
I had no idea they only had one. That's really rare, isn't it?
It is,
you imagine
yeah.
that they have loads. I don't know why.
I think it's because you equate them to small creatures like mice, and mice always have lots.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, I'm gonna move on, and I'm gonna do the next bit quite quickish actually, because I want to be able to get onto time to help them, and I could talk about like animals all day. So what I thought would be really good is, if we want to know what's in our garden, I've said go and look, but actually we're very unlikely to see all of these animals. So it's really nice to be able to look for mammal signs. So I'm not going to do loads on this, but there's some really good books out there, which I will send a list that Steph can disseminate to everybody afterwards. But the main ones to think about is a fox and a dog. Obviously, if you've got a dog in your garden, you're going to know. But I'm just thinking, if you're out and about, it's quite good to know if you've got a fox or a dog. And you can just see that you can draw a line on the fox, whereas with the dog, you can't do that. And I thought I'd show you a couple of examples. So this one is a badger. So you can see really distinctly that there's 5 claw marks and 5 toes for a badger. And it's very squat, just like a badger is. It's the same kind of shape as them, all quite compact and squashed together. Really, really obvious that it's a badger. And then this is a hedgehog. And I always think they look like little high fives. So you can see actually on the front foot that they have 5 And then you can see in the hind foot they have 5 toes as well, but the fifth one on the hind toe doesn't tend to come up, so it looks like it's got 5 on the front and 4 on the back sometimes. But little high fives is a really clear way of seeing if you've got hedgehogs if you do that. You can also put hedgehog tunnels out, which I think I've got information on them later on, but you just put a little bit of paper, a little bit of charcoal, and then they walk through it, and that's where this has come from. So you can see that a hedgehog has walked through it to get to normally some food, and you can start to see what hedgehogs you've got in your garden, what you've got in your garden if you've got hedgehogs. This one's a rabbit, so you can see it quite distinctive. And then the other one that I found when I did some hedgehog trapping as well was a rat. But it's useful to see that they're quite distinct. They're like little spots, almost like little dots on the paper. So I'm going through this quite quickly because I want to make sure we've got time to talk about how we can help them. The other thing you're likely to see is their poo. So it's a really obvious sign that they have been there. And I'm going to go from top left across. So this one looks very similar to a dog. It's normally got hair in it and a bit of bone, and it can go quite white and crusty. That is a fox poo. This one in the middle is a badger. And like Steph says, you can see that they eat just so many different things. So you can really see the variety of their diet in their latrine. So they tend to like open and scratch the surface, like clear away a big path and then poo there. So they're kind of marking their territory, marking where they are, just so any other badgers know that they're walking into another badger's territory. So, and they normally do it in the same place. So once you've got it, if it happens quite regularly, you've got badgers. This one is hedgehog. So it's very dark and it normally looks quite shiny, almost like blue-black shiny, because it tends to be that they've eaten quite a lot of insects. So you can see quite a lot of the insect casing in their poo. And then this one is actually on a windowsill, which gives you a bit of a clue. And it's bat droppings. And I've put some mouse droppings next to you to compare because they look very similar from the outset, but actually very different. So bats don't really carry many diseases. So obviously mice and rodents can carry quite a lot because bat poo is literally just insect remains. So most people don't want to do this, but a really good way to tell is if you get a bat dropping and you rub it, it will crumble to nothing and it will just go into dust because it's just insect. Whereas with a mouse, it will just smudge and be quite grim. So that's a really simple way. But if it's stuck to shelving or the side of a building, it tends to be, it will be bats because you've got it on a window. So it's because they'll poo as they're flying. And I am going to leave this up, but I think we're going to have a 5-minute break because I'm running quite behind. Oh, not 5 minute, a couple of minute break just to get a cup of tea, go to the loo if you need it. And while you're doing that, you can have a little go at seeing if you can guess what these are. And I'll play the sounds, the sound when everybody gets back.
Okay, so come back at 37.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Hi everyone. Yeah, that is good to know. It's good to know what the poop looks like so you can actually identify what's been there if you don't have a camera trap.
Good, I'm pleased that people are liking the poo pictures. That's good. Hopefully everyone's back. So I'm going to play that sound and see if everyone can work out what it is. Extra points if you can remember the species as well. But do we want to do like a shout out? What does can anyone tell me the answer for number 1?
Fox's den.
Yeah, well remembered. Yeah, fox den. Number 2.
Hedgehog poo.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I put a different picture in as well just to see if it threw anyone, but well done. Yeah, dark black, shiny, very distinctively hedgehog. Number 3.
Oh, is it?
Oh, I missed that. Someone said.
A shrew.
Not a shrew, no.
Oh,
Play it again.
Is that a pipistrelle?
It is a pipistrelle, yeah, pipistrelle bat, a soprano pip, which is the one that I showed you in the picture that's likes the really hot roosts. When do bats have their pups? Next one.
going to fly.
You'll remember.
April.
Yeah, April, June time. Amazing. So around they'll have had them, so we'll kind of be thinking about looking for them to come out of their out of their roosts now. So well remembered. And then the last one, excuse me.
Fox.
Yeah, fantastic. So you can see there's like almost like a dead straight line across the paw, so you can tell it's a fox. Awesome. So I feel like we've touched on this, but do we want to have maybe a shout out of different things? So what threats could some of the animals we've been talking about face?
Humans, number 1.
Yeah.
Destruction of environment.
Yeah, definitely.
The lack of animal highways, the way of moving around in between fences, hedges, gates.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Actually, that's really important because it's not just that the loss of the loss of the habitat itself, but the way that animals get around those places. So thinking specifically of hedgehogs getting into different people's gardens, and even bats. Actually, I did my dissertation on bats using hedgerows as ways to get around the country. So not just for food, but if there was massive gaps of hedgerow taken out, the bat got lost because they were used to, a bit like us knowing our route. If a massive bit of road got taken away, we might not then work out where we are. So it's the same with bats.
Made me think about my garden to encourage hedgehogs, because they're literally secure all the way down one side. So there's nowhere for the hedgehogs to be able to get in. So I'm going to have to get my husband to take the gate off and take it up a bit.
Yeah, exactly. They only need a really small space. It's like a size of a postcard. That's the size that you need to cut to let a hedgehog get into your garden.
We've had a few other answers in the chat, Dani, about pesticides, habitat fragmentation, light pollution for the bats, and air quality as well.
Amazing. Yeah, I think we've covered most of them. So mine were, I was thinking main issues for most of those animals would be pollution, pesticides, herbicides. Reducing insect numbers means it's reducing insect availability for all of those species that we've talked about. All of them at some point had like slugs, snails, or insects of the flying kind that they were eating. So if we're spraying everything, we're going to lose a lot of that variety. Really like that someone mentioned habitat fragmentation. So I've got a roadmap here because it just shows how fragmented the UK is. how broken up it is. And if we think every time we zoom in, it's getting more and more fragmented. So those animals have got such tiny little patches, can't travel around to different areas. So it's really important for us to try and build up those connections and map it, especially if we're thinking of our gardens. They're perfect features, aren't they, that can be joined up if everybody's involved in getting those animals to have more space. And linked to that is the dead green lawn. Nothing grows there, no biodiversity at all in just the lawn. So having those wild spaces within your garden is really important. Have also put, I don't think anyone mentioned this, is cats. I know I mentioned it right at the beginning, but for quite a lot of the smaller species, so bats in particular, cats are a huge issue. So if you do have cats, big please, just put a bell on them, or don't let them out at dawn and dusk. They're the massive issue. So for a lot of small mammals and for bats in particular, just keeping your cat indoors at dawn and dusk means that it reduces that issue, because if a cat spots where a roost is, for bats, it will sit and pick all of them off. So then that roost will be no more. Whereas if they don't know where that roost is, or they're inside or outside, you've got no issues with that. That's a really key thing to take away as well. We talked about climate change, the other thing I was going to talk about. I think they are the main ones, and air quality actually definitely, again, affecting insect numbers, which is then affecting our food maps and food webs. So I've got a few other things I'm going to talk through for the last 5-10 minutes, and then I'll give you a chance for questions as well. So we've talked a lot about insects, making sure that they're good for our moths and slugs and snails, for lots of other creatures, so our hedgehogs and badgers. But for moths in particular, if we're thinking about nighttime, light pale flowers are really good for them, because they are spotted in poor light. So most moths' vision means that they can spot really clearly white or light flowers compared to any other flowers. And having them in a variety of shapes as well is really useful, because different moths have different proboscis, which means that they'll come out and eat different and drink different types of plants. So thinking about lots of different variety as well. And daisy and carrot family are really good for insect landing platforms. So they've got that runway, the white flower on the daisy, to then the middle, which is where they get their food from. But as well as just thinking about planting flowers, it's actually really good to have a diverse type of range of plants and shrubs and trees in the garden. So if we think back to the video at the start, there were some bigger trees. And if we're thinking about hedgehogs having that leaf litter to hibernate in, and we're thinking about attracting bigger insects, so like slugs and snails and stuff, having a few trees and shrubs is really important. Also helps if you've got a hedgerow, because then those animals can follow that hedgerow and go between two gardens, in theory, to your garden and the one next door with those hedges. Planting native trees like willow and oak are really good. Oak has so many insects that are attracted to them, and willow, there's a lot of moths that use willow as a food plant. And actually I've got a picture here of some common nighttime providers of nectar, so flowers, and also some moths and their caterpillars. So we've got, for example, jasmine and oak as well are good for moths. And creating wild, messy areas in your garden, so not having it perfect, is a really good takeaway message. Animals like a bit of mess and a bit of leaf litter and things like that they can hide in, or that they can get insects from. So that is a really good idea to do. And also hedgerows or dead hedges as well is a really nice other feature that will help with those insects and help with linear features. And I thought I'll plug, I mean, it's the end of May, but for next year, you can do No Mow May. So you're obviously attracting a lot of insects, which is really nice for your gardens in general. It looks beautiful, but it's also really good for bats and other plants as well. We mentioned pesticides, so actually not using pesticides. I'm not sure if you're doing anything in your course about different things you can use instead of pesticides, but there's so much research out there about using, like I've got, I can't see my own picture there, neem oil instead, which you can get. It's really strong, strong oil that you can spray around your crops, and then it will stop any insects going. So just not using those pesticides like we talked about earlier, it builds up in lots of animals and can then cause the animals to be poisoned, or it's killing the insects so there's no food for them in the first place. Another way to get around that.
Dani, sorry, what was that?
Neem oil, it's NEEM oil. You can buy it in loads of garden centres now, and you literally just put a few drops in with water and you spray it around, and it works really well in my garden. There are a few other types as well that you can use. So I know when I used to work for Avon Wildlife Trust, they made nettle spray as well. So they just pulled out a load of nettle, left it with some water for a couple of weeks, and then got the juice off that and did exactly the same and sprayed that, and that seemed to work at keeping pesticides out. So there's quite a lot of different types that you can use. Some people use orange peel as well. So they put orange peel all around the garden, and then the insects go to the orange peel and eat that rather than going and eating your crops, because apparently it tastes nicer. So that's quite a useful one as well. And the other thing that has been recommended is using like strong smelling plants next to your veg. So doing companion planting. So planting like mint, garlic, and chili, apparently. I've not tried that one. Seems to work really well. And chili actually as a spray has worked. I've tried that one. So that could be an option as well. But just trying to be pesticide free as much as possible is a really good thing for everybody involved. You don't want it on your fruit and veg that you're eating either. This is a bit of a gruesome picture next, but I just wanted to illustrate fly paper. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine because it causes so many injuries for bats. But if you're sensitive to animals in distress, not the picture for you. But you can see some long-eared bats have got stuck on the fly paper. They get onto it because they can see the flies on it, and then they'll go onto it and then they'll get themselves stuck. And it takes hours and hours and hours, if you catch them in time, to get it off. You've got to clean up that bat completely with washing up liquid to try and get the sticky off of them. You've then got to clean the washing up liquid off of them, and it's a really long process. And obviously you've got to have caught them when they're okay still. So it's a big takeaway message. Please don't use fly paper, especially because you hang it up and then the bats fly into it as well. I'll take that picture off because it's not very nice. Another thing I recommend is water. So water is really good for lots of insects because quite a lot of the larvae of quite a lot of insects, not moths, but other smaller like midges, mosquitoes and things like that are obviously food for other animals, lay their eggs in the water. So just having some little bit of water in your garden is actually really good. And if you think actually, you'll see, I've just shown you I've got foxes and badgers in my garden, just giving them something to drink, especially as climate change, it's getting a lot hotter. I think there were quite a lot of people reporting animals out in the day last year in the heat wave because they just didn't have any water. So putting some water out for them to drink as well is really important. And then we've talked about this one already, but yeah, making a hedgehog highway. So you can see from this picture, you don't need a very big gap in your fence, and you can create that pathway between all of your gardens. And I've just got a picture of a really nice garden here, and you can see that if they can get to all of those gardens, they've got their habitat, they've got their areas, they would be fine. But part of the reason that they're having lots of issues is because they're going on roads, so they're not being able to get into gardens. Then they're going across roads and getting run over because they can't find a path or a safe way across. So being able to do that is really important. I thought I'd actually put on hedgehog tunnels on here as well, but again, I'll send the link to Steph so she can send it out to you. But if you are interested in seeing if you do have hedgehogs in your garden, it's a really nice way of doing that. And then hedgehog homes obviously we got asked about earlier, is another really good thing to pop out into your garden, making sure it's in somewhere cooler and sheltered. You don't want it out like in direct sunlight. They'll overheat in it. So you need it somewhere kind of slightly sheltered, slightly shady. Thinking about like the fact that they would nest under a hedgerow or in quite a lot of shrub, you kind of want to emulate that environment for them.
And Dani, is there anything else? So you were saying about obviously the hedgehog highway and the house in the hedgerow and things like that. Are there other things you can do to try and attract hedgehogs into the garden?
I think by doing all of those things, you're going to be helping in getting your garden attractive by having lots of insects, lots of different varieties of plants is really good, because the more variety in the garden, the more likely there are to be lots of insects, so the more likely they are to come to your garden. I know some people say putting out food, but unless they're in the area anyway, and then you're kind of having to put that out because they're going to come for the food. So I think actually getting your garden into the top variety, like as good as it can be for them, is probably a better way of doing that. Yeah. You can also actually, I know that the Wildlife Trust by me, not Wildlife Trust, the Wildlife Rescue by me, we're looking for quality gardens for people, for them to release their hedgehogs into. So if you think your garden is already really good for it, but you're not getting hedgehogs, it might be worth approaching them and saying you're happy for them to do soft releases, which just means that they come and leave the hedgehog there for a few nights and see if it goes. If it doesn't go, they then take it somewhere else, because it's obviously not right for them.
And where's that?
So that was Secret World, which is in North Somerset.
Yes, yeah, know that. Okay.
Any other questions on hedgehogs? And then bat boxes. Oh, this one hasn't come up. That's right. And then there's bat boxes. There are so many different varieties of bats, which means there are so many different varieties of bat boxes. The easiest ones to make are the Kent bat boxes, which I've got the image of here. As you can see here, and there's a made one here. But you can also get these bat boxes as well, which are really good for if you've got kind of a more woody environment by your house or near your house, or you've got hedgerows. If you've got more like buildings that you'd be putting it onto, I'd recommend doing the Kent bat box, which is this bat box here. Someone asked me earlier where you want to put it. So it's really interesting because there's lots of different things to consider when you're putting up a bat box. But the main thing is to think about, they want kind of warm, dry place to rear their young in the summer. So it wants to be warm but not hot. So it's thinking about where the sun is. Is there a shady spot in there? You want to have it so that it's I'm having a moment with my easts and wests and stuff, but it should be southeasterly or southwesterly. So you've got a bit of sun, but you don't have all of the sun on those boxes over the whole time. And that means that it'll be really good for maternity roosts. And you also want to think about wind. It's another really important thing. If it's going to be really windy and catch that box, you won't have bats there. So even if it's like really nice, perfect, like dappled sunlight, shaded spot, but you've got wind whipping around, that you won't have bats in that area. And equally, if you've got, they need to have a direct line to fly into. So if you've got loads of overhanging bushes that are covering the entrance, or they can't see a direct flight path into that box, it won't work. So you need to cut it back so that they've got a nice flight path, or pop it somewhere that they do have it. And what sometimes is quite good is, and you can see that it's done on this picture with the two grey boxes, that you put two on, because if it gets too hot in one, they can move to another, and it gives them a bit of options really in the garden. And if, like I mentioned, in maternity roosts, they like it to be hotter. In other times of the year when they're not having their pups, they like it to be a bit cooler, so they will then move between those two boxes as well.
Dani, what's the other bat box called that's not the Kent bat box?
Oh,
Or is
sorry,
it
it's an SF3, which is not a very good name for it, but it's an SF3, which I can never remember what it stands for.
Interesting. And we've only got a couple of minutes left. Have you got much more to cover, Dani? Or
I've literally got, I think, 2 more slides, and then
okay,
I can stop and answer questions. I can fly through these and I'll answer questions.
okay, let's do
The
that.
thing I was going to say was, if you do put bat boxes up or bird boxes, just thinking about how you treat them, because quite a lot of people end up painting them with stuff that is actually really poisonous. So there's a really good link on BCT about what type of timber treatment you should be using and painting for both bird and bat boxes. And the other thing to think about is light. So if you put loads of lights in your garden, you're only going to get a couple of varieties of bats. If you want lots of different types of bats, you need to have dark patches within your garden. Otherwise, they'll be scared off by those lights. And then finally, it was just to say about the BCT helpline. This is the number. So if you do end up finding any bats in your garden, then this is the number to call, and they can put you in touch with a local bat carer that is around in your area. And I'm just going to show you a cute video, and then I'll answer questions. But this is one of the long-eared bats that I rescued and released this year. So his name was Bertie. You can see him being flight testing him in the house, seeing whether he could fly before I released him. And that is completely it. So I will stop sharing and answer any questions for the last minute or two. How do I stop sharing? There we go.
Thanks, Dani. We've had a question in the chat, which is, what can we do to support hedgehogs, badgers, foxes, bats and birds in places like allotments, parks and green spaces, especially areas used by dogs, without banning dogs?
Oh, that's a great question. So in allotments, actually, there's some really interesting studies coming out that have shown that they're actually much better than quite a lot of gardens and nature reserves, because they've got that variety. So I feel like I'm going back to the same thing again, but planting that mixture means you're going to have a mixture of different types of insects, which means you're going to have a mixture of different types of bats. You're also going to have the slugs and snails for foxes and badgers, and having that variety. So I think that it really is thinking back to food webs and food chains and how you can do that. And again, pesticides on allotments is a really important thing to think about, especially, I know you're only normally a section on that allotment, but trying to spread the message wider, I think.
Having the confidence to talk to other people about it and convince them is a really good one, which hopefully you will have got on this course, the knowledge and the confidence to spread the word.
Yeah. And putting a camera trap out and then showing people what is in the allotments might then make them think, oh, we've got all this really cool stuff. Let's think about how we can protect it as a group.
Yeah. We had another question earlier in the chat that I've saved for the end, but just about foxes with mange, if there's anything that can be done for them.
So again, if you ring up a rescue centre, they will come out and look after them. So sometimes they do get inundated. So I remember that from when I worked there, that we could only go and get the really serious cases. But if they've got capacity, they will come and collect them and sort of fix them and then release them again. So that's a really good thing to do.
How high should bat boxes and bird boxes be from the floor?
Oh, that's a really good question. So normally, I'm not very good with meters, but 2 things of a ladder. So what's that? But between 5 and 7 meters is probably the average putting it up. Is that right? Meters? Yeah. 5. So quite high if you can, but quite often people put them up a bit lower than that. If you've got cats in your garden though, don't put them lower, because that won't it'll encourage the cats to go in, and that wouldn't actually be a great idea. But yeah,
pretty high.
Interestingly though, on that note, there's loads of books on this, but they always say put them up high, and then the biggest Seratin roost in the country is about 20 centimeters off the ground, and there's 500 bats that come out of it. So I say all this stuff, but wildlife doesn't actually listen. So if you have a perfect location but you can't get it that high, have a go and see what happens, because they'll do things to surprise you.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, we've run a little bit over, so we better leave leave things there. But thank you for coming, everyone, and thank you so much, Dani. I've learned so much.
Thank you, Dani.
Fantastic.
Thank you. That was
Thank you.
brilliant.
That's been really useful.
Thank you all. I appreciate that. Yeah, any questions, let me know and I can answer them.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yes.
guys. And we've got our last session next week. Oh my God. And it's all about building highways and connectivity and trees and things like that. So very relevant to bats. So hope to see you then.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye. Ah.